Distribution provided by Cloud Sigma, the cloud that adapts to you. Visit cloudsigma.com/thisweekin for a free $200 credit.
This Week in Startups is brought to you by SnapTerms, online legal protection made simple. Visit snapterms.com and enter the code TWIST to receive a free NDA with every order. And by MailChimp. Manage lists with up to 2,000 subscribers and send up to 12,000 emails per month for free with MailChimp.
Hey everybody, it's Jason Calacanis here. A very special episode. Jonathan Abrams, the original founder of Friendster and Nuzzle and Socialize and Founders Den and angel investor in more than a dozen companies, is going to be with us for the hour. Stick with us. It's going to be an amazing entrepreneurial startup discussion.
That's what it's all about, man. They said money is the root of all evil. What? Funny how it feeds my people. We ain't gonna live like equals until we get the money, spend the money, and defeat you. Yeah, money is the root of all evil. What? Funny how it feeds my people. Yeah, we ain't gonna live like equals until we get the money, spend the money, and defeat you.
Hey everybody, welcome back to This Week in Startups. Finally, I have Jonathan Abrams on the program. I've been wanting to have him on for years. For the whole 3-year lifespan of the company. And
I've been wanting to be on since I was a kid.
That makes...
Growing up in Canada, I've always been dying to be on this show.
Yeah, we were big in Canada in the 70s. So, hey everybody, it's Jason Calacanis, the host of This Week in Startups. Thank you so much for tuning into this awesome episode, which is available to you for free. High quality content like this can only be done because we have great partners, and one of those great partners is SnapTerms. If you don't have a privacy policy, if you don't have a terms of service, you could get sued like immediately, like tomorrow, and there are all these people out there trying to gun for you. So here, I'll pull up on my screen just how beautiful SnapTerms is. You go in, you pick, and it makes a simple, clean, and easy way to protect your site by having the proper terms of service. You see those terms of services on everybody's site. You think, God, I got to spend $10,000, $5,000, $20,000 on a lawyer to do that? You don't. Look at this great pricing. $299, $149, $499. They have a bunch of different programs here to do it for well under $1,000, which I'm telling you is a fraction of what you would pay an attorney. And we use it here. Again, we only have people who are partners on the program who use it. And we made this great terms of service here for ourselves, for the This Week in Web TV network. And they put like funny stuff in there about what you do to keep it fresh, and it's a great service. To get started, you can just go to snapterms.com to get started, and enter the code TWIST, and you'll get a free NDA with every order. You always want to have a non-disclosure agreement if you're talking to people about your idea, mutual NDA. Those things are expensive as well, and they'll give you a free one if you go and order. This is a great service. Again, we're using it. It works. It's affordable. And you just fill out a couple of forms as to what you're doing, and in just a week or so, maybe 2, they'll get you a great, perfect terms of service, and you can get revisions for a couple of months too if you want to change it, which is fair. Really great job, SnapTerms. And if you're a fan of the show, really just go ahead and say thank you at SnapTerms, because these are the folks who are providing a great service to all of us as startup companies. And they're sponsoring the program to make sure that the show gets better and better every week. Better microphones, better guests, more traveling around the country to find these great entrepreneurs and share these great stories. So I thank you, SnapTerms, from the bottom of my heart. You, of course, are most well known for founding Friendster, which really was the first social network to hit critical mass. I only can remember of 2 instances of even the concept of social networking. One would be 6 Degrees, which was just incredibly poorly executed in the late 90s. It was more like a contact database. And then
I didn't even know much about it, but my recollection was that it was sort of more like Plaxo.
It was Plaxo, yeah. It was like, here's your contacts, and that's it, manage your contacts. They call it social networking, even though it had the name 6 Degrees, it wasn't. And then there was something called Rise, which existed for a brief moment.
I think Rise may still be around.
And Rise may still be around.
So Rise was started by a buddy of mine, Adrian, and
Adrian Scott?
And it was focused on business. So I think it was more like LinkedIn, or attempting to be.
It was the original LinkedIn. And then you started Friendster. So take us back to the spark. What was the because you really are the godfather in a way of social networking, years and years before all these other sites hit critical mass. You hit critical mass with Friendster. So what was the moment in which you said this site needs to exist? Because I remember Shenny Jardin, now from Boing Boing, and then working with me on Silicon Alley Reporter, showing it to me and telling me how cool it was, and just being one of the first people to even log into the service and having my mind blown that I could click on somebody and see their friends, and they could see my friends, and I could see how far. What was the moment in the shower where you thought this is a good idea, and what was the inspiration for Friendster?
There was multiple inspirations, and everybody always wants the shower moment. I call it the Pez dispenser moment, sort of eBay.
Which, by the way, that story
is probably fake.
Is in fact fake, from what I've been told.
So everybody always wants that story for Friendster. And then when you don't supply it, then they create a story. So there's always been like the fake story that I started Friendster to meet girls, which is not true.
Right.
So I don't really have a single sort of shower moment.
Right.
It was 2002, and as you remember well, things were pretty bad back then.
It was the worst year of our collective lives. Would you agree that was the worst year of our collective
It wasn't
lives?
the worst year of my life, but it was certainly the worst, probably the deadest period of the Silicon Valley and San Francisco scene since I moved here to work at Netscape in 1996.
What was it like when you walk up and down the streets that are now packed
Quiet.
with huge rents?
It was quiet, and people actually left Silicon Valley. They moved back to Canada or Texas or wherever. They went to business school or they became a realtor. I mean, people just sort of gave up, abandoned their interest in the web and the internet. And it's not like people stopped using the internet, but certainly in the San Francisco and Silicon Valley scene, for that year or two, enthusiasm went down to zero. But I had a lot of time free because I had sold a company, then I was working in another company, they merged with the company and moved to Southern California, and there just wasn't a lot going on in 2002.
Right.
So that gave me the freedom to work on a bunch of goofy ideas that sort of came together in the prototype of Friendster. And it was not sort of one single shower moment. It was a combination of being inspired by a whole bunch of other, before it was social, it was community. So there was a whole bunch of sites. Rise was one. There was Match.com and Evite and eGroups and GeoCities and Hot or Not. There was a whole bunch of things.
They used to all be in the group genre, like message boards and forums.
Right. I mean, those sites
That was
were
the
all
state of the art.
online community, online communication. They didn't have some of the concepts of Friendster, but they were still part of what came before Friendster and part of the inspiration. And another part of it was the Stanley Milgram stuff.
Right.
The 6 degrees of separation thing is called the small world theory. And Friendster was not my first company, it was my second. So I had already moved to Silicon Valley from Canada and had to do a lot of networking. I hadn't gone to Stanford or Berkeley. So I'd been somebody who had been doing networking, meeting people through other people as an entrepreneur. So the concept of meeting people through other people was ingrained in me. And I started coming up with an idea of, what if online, instead of being anonymous, instead of being CyberDude307, I'd be Jonathan, and I'd bring the real world social context that I had with me online.
And at that time, the idea of using your real name was considered like secondary or weird. You obviously had a handle. I was the Cyber Surfer when the internet first came on. That was my handle. Did you have a handle? What was your handle?
I probably did. I mean, I had a BBS in my teens on my Commodore 64 in Toronto.
Wow, I had a BBS in the 80s
I was on.
What was your first modem?
Oh, it was probably some really crap, and I probably couldn't afford the Haze.
What was the?
So it was probably a crappy Haze compatible clone.
Yeah. What baud? What baud?
300.
I had a 300 baud. So that's legit.
Yes.
I give you a fist bump for that.
So
to have a 300 baud modem.
So it's
I don't
funny
think people
because
realize how slow that is.
Well, our kids are just never going to understand the concept of.
Yeah,
it's busy. I can't log in. The BBS is busy.
Bulletin board systems were the precursor to the internet. Explain what a bulletin board system was technically. What was it?
Well, I mean, people watching this are probably too even young to understand.
Explain to them.
You would have your computer was of course not online all the time. You didn't have broadband or Wi-Fi, and you would dial up, and your modem would call some other modem. And if it was a big BBS, instead of just one line, like my crappy BBS, then maybe they'd have 10 lines.
Right.
And sometimes they're all busy, so you'd have to keep redialing to get in. And do you remember FidoNet? That was the way BBSs were linked together with other BBSs before the internet. So you could send an email to somebody, and a series of BBSs would call other BBSs
and forward it around.
To reduce the long distance charges, and they'd sort of daisy chain. And 4 or 5 days later, the guy in Minneapolis would get my email from Toronto.
It's amazing. What an amazing time. I was a bulletin board. It was a sysop and I was a junior sysop. So there were, how did it work? You were like, what was the one called? Power bulletin board? I can't remember the name of it, but it will come to me. I remember setting up the software.
Now, what computer was this? Terra
PC,
Sadie or
it was a PC.
Apple
It was a
PC? So
PC.
mine was on my
PC
Commodore
board.
64.
It was called PC board.
Mine was on my Commodore 64.
Wow,
And
that's legit.
and it probably had a total of 10 users.
So just people know, like if you had 300 baud, then it went up to like a 1200, 4800, 9600. Then you had 48 and 56K, and then 128K, then
Right.
256K,
But that was all-
and then DSL came.
Yeah, that was all years.
And then
years
you got
later.
into megabits. But if you had, right now on your phone, if you're using like LTE, you might have 1, 2, 3, up to 20 megabit,
Right.
20 million.
Yeah. I mean, I'm talking.
We
about,
had single hundreds.
Yeah, this was 1994, maybe.
This is, yeah.
Yeah.
Way
no,
before
sorry, 84.
84. We're talking about 84.
84.
Decade before that,
So
before
it's
the
a long
internet.
time ago.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was doing at the same time. So that magic, in a way, and at that time you didn't use real names. That was verboten
Right.
in a way.
And then when the web came online, I was a comp sci student in
Yeah.
college, and still, muds and mushes and moos and Usenet and all that kind of stuff. I mean, and I'll use, like you said, a lot of the things before Friendster were like message boards and group things, and people would
Yeah.
still often use handles. And like
Right.
on GeoCities, they called it community,
Right.
but if you and I both joined GeoCities and created our own page, they would put us in sort of an arbitrary street or village or something.
Right.
Even if you and I actually in real life
Yeah.
were somehow connected in any way, that wasn't reflected in the way the online
you would have
communities
like
were
a
built.
cigar store, and I would be like a dominatrix, and they'd be like right next to each other, and then the math tutor.
I don't think it was that racy at GeoCities, but they would sort of group you in these like I can't remember, it was either streets or cities or something. but
streets and
it was a
communities,
sort of
yeah.
an arbitrary virtual
Yeah.
sense of
So you're into
community.
networking. You read the studies.
Yeah, and
around.
I also read Malcolm Gladwell's Tipping Point, and
Sure.
that really had got around that time came out, and that had got me thinking about all this Stanley Milgram stuff.
Connectors, yeah.
Connectors, and how people were connected to each other. And I came up with just a bunch of goofy ideas that
What
sort
were
of
some
came
of the other
together.
ones that came together to make it? What were the ideas?
I mean, one was the idea of real names. One was the idea of I wanted to create something that was one of the things people would use it for was to date and hook up. But it wasn't a dating site. It wasn't a
No.
hooking up site. But that's one of the things that people would use it for. But people would use it also for other things, and people who weren't single and weren't dating would also use it. And that was sort of a weird concept too.
That was a weird concept. Like, why are we socializing if I'm married or if I'm in a relationship? I shouldn't be on one of these sites. And I remember at the time, had to go through a painstaking process of explaining to people, this is for everybody. This is to find business contacts.
Sometimes you would get a Friendster invitation, and you might, not until your fifth one, or maybe then you also saw it on TV or something, sort of succumbed and said, maybe this isn't spam, or viral. Like, what is this thing? And your friends would sort of nag you into joining it.
How quickly did it grow? Because it was one of the first sites to literally go viral, right? I mean, this is where the term viral came from, was Friendster.
Well, I think that Hotmail came before Friendster, and that was
Okay.
viral in a different way because people would see get your own free Hotmail.
Right.
But
I think because you were the second, then they called it a trend and came up with a word
maybe.
for it.
I mean, a lot of things that have been viral since then have been based on sort of the Friendster concepts because it was sort of the Metcalfe effect. Friendster was more useful to you if you got your friends to use it with you, and therefore people would bug their friends to use it with them. And there was some Metcalfe's law, and there was some game mechanics. Like I didn't use the term then, but you could see, if you in the early days, you might have 8 friends, and if I had 20 friends, you would then probably be inclined to get 5 more of your friends to sign up for Friendster so that you would
have more
friends than me, and then it would just keep going and going.
Right.
So it
You
grew
didn't intend
very
on that.
fast. Pardon?
You didn't intend on there being a friend race. It just
No,
happened and you
I
noticed
did.
it.
You
you did?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't as explicit and sort of as, maybe cynically manipulated as some game mechanics today.
Right.
But I showed the number of friends. I showed certain numbers. You would see all the person's friends. So there were things that were sort of highlighted, partially because it was interesting, but I wasn't completely unsurprised that it would encourage some of that,
And people
that behavior.
didn't like the idea that you showed the number of friends. Like some people thought that should be private at the time.
I don't think many people thought that, but there was all sorts of weird attitudes. I mean, just the idea of having a profile with your real name and picture on the internet at all was weird. So as you said, there was Rise, which was never got huge, but they were trying to be a business networking site, sort of like LinkedIn.
Right.
So if you were an entrepreneur, maybe you'd put your profile on the internet, and of course, dating sites existed like Match.com, and you'd put your profile on the internet for that. Of course, you'd hope none of your friends actually saw it.
Right.
And we flipped that upside down with Friendster, and we said, invite your friends now to do this with you.
Right.
But that was a weird concept. I mean, the idea that regular people, not entrepreneurs, not people looking to date, but just anybody would put even a picture on the internet was not intuitive. It was not normal at the time.
When did you know that the viral loop had started, and what impact did that have just on the business itself? Because people hadn't really seen that, I guess, since Hotmail, and that was, sort of, I don't think everybody was aware that this could even happen, that a website could spread like that. We had word of mouth.
As we talked
society,
about, in 2002, nobody would even wanted to hear about another internet company. I mean, everybody was really sort of anti-consumer internet in 2002. But it started growing immediately. But that was invisible to everybody. So when I had a sort of password-controlled private beta prototype of this goofy thing that I'd built, which of course I had no idea if anybody would like it or not, but as soon as I invited some friends on it, they started inviting their friends, and they started inviting their friends, and it really was like the shampoo commercial, and it started growing exponentially right off the beginning. But when it was going from 10 to 100, to 100 people to 150 to 200 to 500, obviously nobody was noticing this. When it started going from thousands to millions in 2003, people started to notice. But it really grew from the very beginning. And I had no idea. I mean, it was an experiment. So when I just invited friends to play with it, I had no idea if they'd actually really, bother their friends with it, because it was sort of a goofy idea that you would list who your friends are on the internet and then bug them, and they'd have to confirm yes or no, and then you'd see all the names and pictures. It was by no means something that I knew was going to work.
So fast forward a couple of years, you raised money for it. Who was the first VC you showed it to, or first investor? And what was their reaction?
Well,
where did they start calling you?
The first investors, the first two investors that were angel investors, one was a woman named Melissa, who had been the VP of marketing at my previous company, Hotlinks, and then the other that I remember amongst the first two was Dave Bazuki, who's now the CEO of Roblox.
Wow.
They were amongst the first angel investors. And then in the fall of 2003, we raised a venture round.
Yeah,
and there were three VCs, and the Kleiner Perkins, Benchmark Capital, and Battery were in that round.
And that was in 2003?
That was the fall of 2003, yeah.
So you go see John Doerr, you go see Bill Gurley. Who was the third fund?
Battery.
Who did you see at Battery? What was the reaction of VCs to this? Because, I mean, it was pretty brave in 2003 to come in and say, I mean, it was ballsy, let's put it out there, to come in and say, I have an internet company and I need money.
Well, actually, by the time this was taking place, Friendster had already grown exponentially. It had already broken over 1 million users without being institutionally funded.
Right.
It had already been in almost every magazine and newspaper in the country. It had been on TV. And actually, almost every VC in Silicon Valley was calling me.
Wow.
So it was one of those unique situations. So raising VC funding for Friendster in the fall of 2003 was very easy. And many VCs were actually mad at me when they were not selected to be investors in the company.
Well, that's amazing to reconcile, given the fact that after 9/11, all funding was turned off and nobody cared about it. And not only that, correct me if I'm wrong, people hated the internet people. They thought that it was a scam. They thought the internet was associated most closely with fraud. Well, like the whole industry was considered a fraud.
There were a lot of dot-com era, 99 era companies that had gone public and then lost like 99% of their value. And yeah, people, like I said, in 2002, if I'd gone in to raise funding in 2002 for Friendster, I would have, had the door slammed in my face.
Right.
So by the time Friendster got the VC funding, it was a little later. It was now sort of the end of 2003, and Friendster, was growing very fast. And that was actually sort of inspiring the beginnings of the Web 2.0 sort of hysteria.
It was sort of the start of it, because I remember in 2003 I started thinking about doing a blog network, and Friendster was in a way, inspiration, because I was like, the web wasn't a fraud, it was, a trend.
Yeah.
And it wasn't
Well, the whole time
hype.
people didn't stop using the internet. So people were still using Google and Yahoo
And
and
more.
Amazon, and it was growing. But for that sort of 1 or 2 year period between the sort of the collapse
Yeah, it
of
was
the
2
dot-com
years,
boom
yeah.
and 2003,
Yeah.
nobody wanted to
2000
fund or
to
start
2003
companies.
it was
Yeah.
over. And so
but the internet still was being used.
it grew very quickly. What did it peak at in terms of employees, and how long were you CEO for?
I was only CEO for a few months after the venture financing.
Yeah.
From the venture financing in the fall of '03 to the company being sold in '09, the company went through 6 CEOs in those 6 years. So 6 years, 6 CEOs. So, I was CEO for the first, year of the company from beta launch, well, a little more than a year, in '02 to being replaced in early '04. That was the period when it was going like this.
Did you want to be replaced, or was that like the board pushed you?
Well, it's a complicated thing. I mean,
Yeah.
at the time in '03, this was really the dark ages in some ways, even though it was my second company.
Yeah.
This is before Y Combinator, before Venture Hacks, AngelList, The Funded, before a lot of these blogs, before a lot of stuff. And I never even crossed my mind that I should attempt to retain control of the company.
Right.
I thought the right thing to do is recruit very experienced, successful investors, the ones that had been involved in Google and Yahoo and Amazon, and
Right.
and trust them, and they would help take the company to the next level.
And founder control just didn't exist as a concept. If you did launch it today, you probably would have had founder control by default. Being who you are and your track record, you could get any level of control you want.
Well, I think Friendster may have been also an example that people learned something from. And I guess at Google they did do some stuff, but it wasn't until they went public that we learned a little about how the Google guys had sort of put some weird stuff in the bylaws.
Yeah, to keep control. So the sort of sideways trajectory of Friendster and the 6 CEOs, what do you attribute it to? How do you reconcile that as an entrepreneur? You created something obviously world-changing on a very big scale, but then you watch, the revolving door with the CEOs, the meddling VCs. I'm using that word, not you, but meddling VCs perhaps, and the best meddling VCs you could have, in fact. If you're going to have VCs meddle, it might as well be them. But and it doesn't reach the level obviously everybody had hoped for. How do you reconcile that as an entrepreneur? Is it hard? Hey, everybody. It's the MailChimp commercial. You've been waiting for it. I probably just blew out the speakers in your Tesla. Sorry about that. If you're wearing the new Apple earbuds, it's probably hurt a lot. But listen, I've been using MailChimp for a very long time. I don't even need to read the copy of the commercial because I know it by heart. It's an amazing service. I use it daily for the launch ticker. I use it for my Jason Nation newsletter. We use it for This Week in Startups. I love MailChimp. I've been using it for years, and their product is gorgeous, and it's been designed to just do all these amazing features, whether it's mobile templates or analytics. They just make it work. And let me tell you something, delivery rates are going down for people who don't use products like MailChimp. They're just plummeting because you know how it is. How many times have you had your mom's email go in the spam filter? The people are getting, who run the spam filters are getting crazy. They're blocking everything because they want people to feel like, oh my God, my Gmail, my Yahoo Mail, it works perfectly. Well, you know what? MailChimp's got relationships with all those people and they take it seriously. I had somebody who told me that they had a really high complaint rate on their mailing list and that MailChimp had turned them off. And I said, thank you, MailChimp, for doing that. MailChimp will turn off the bad actors so that the good actors, you and I, the people building our companies, can get through. And they hold the line. They are not going to let people abuse the system. And if you have less than 2,000 subscribers and you send less than 12,000 emails per month, it's free. My thing is every brand, every product, every person should have an email list because that email list will grow and grow and grow. And even if it's just a couple hundred people or a dozen people, let me tell you, those are your super fans. And I can tell you the super fans of my program, This Week in Startups, are rabid. When I ask them for help on something, they do it. And they are happy to do it, and I'm happy to do things with them. And the way I reach them is in their email box because, hey, your social network can change. And the social networks are changing the rules all the time. If you're investing in a Facebook page, you're a dope because look what they did. They charged you to get your likes, and now they're charging you to reach the people who you got to like it and people who are your fans. Not MailChimp. If you've got that email address, you've got it for life. And there's no silliness going on where you're going to get double taxed like Facebook is double taxing people. MailChimp is the gold standard. Everybody needs to have MailChimp. If your startup is not collecting emails, every day that goes by, you're losing a dozen, 2 dozen, 100 emails. If you just get a dozen emails a day, you realize you'll have like 4,000 emails, 5,000 emails a year from now. If you did that for the 3 or 4 years that you've been running your startup, you'd have a 25,000 email list right now. How powerful would that be? How would that help you make your quarter and your sales numbers, huh? Think about it. Email is the most powerful communication tool on the internet today. Not Twitter, not Facebook, it's email. That's why I rely on it, and that's why I rely on the best email provider, MailChimp. The free plan is always free. Drag and drop file uploading, blah, la, 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 blah, 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 blah. Amazing feature, amazing feature, amazing feature. You get the idea. I use the product. You need to use the product. Thank you, MailChimp.
Well, on one hand, I'm proud of some of the things that we did at Friendster.
Right.
And, on the other hand, it's disappointing that the early employees, the early angel investors who correctly believed in me and the vision of Friendster long before everybody in the world got it,
Yeah.
I would have hoped that they would have been rewarded for that faith and for being right. And unfortunately, that didn't really happen. So Friendster was sold for around 40 million in 2009. The Malaysian company that bought it then promptly sold the patents that I'm the inventor of to Facebook for more than they paid to buy the company, which was sort of the final chapter of the mismanagement of that company.
Right.
So, it's frustrating. MySpace was bought for around, the parent company, around 600 million, Bebo, 800 and something million.
Yeah.
So clearly, the early people at Friendster should have done a lot better. And that's frustrating, especially considering,
How about you?
ultimately,
Did you get anything out of the sale, or you
a little bit,
A little bit, modest.
but I was more frustrated that all the early people, the angels, the employees, did not do well, and that's on me,
Right.
for maybe being too naive and trusting the wrong people. But ultimately, that's my responsibility, and that will always be a disappointment for me.
Yeah, but you carry on. You still make companies. You still invest. So you
Of
create.
course.
You well, no, I mean
Yeah.
it's interesting because I've had rough times too, and then Silicon Valley Reporter crashing and burning and
Yeah.
having to sell it.
Well, you have to
for-
remember that this was my second company, Friendster,
Right.
and I'd already gone through running a company as a first-time founder and CEO during the dot-com boom, then during the dot-com crash,
Right.
and dealing with that. That was a tough time for me.
That's
And
extremely tough.
for most folks. And
me
I was
too.
a first-timer,
Yeah.
and after that, I was like, man.
What was
my-
the toughest thing the first time? You had to
Well,
lay off
for
a lot
me,
of people.
For me, it was that it
Shut the
just so
door.
happened that as the dot-com crash was going on and I was dealing with the challenges at the startup, I also had a bunch of stuff going on in my personal life
Yeah.
and my family that was difficult all at the same time.
Yeah.
So it just happened
It
to be
rains and pours.
one of those periods that some people sometimes go to where you have just a bunch of bad stuff at the same time,
Yeah.
unfortunately. But so that was tough. And then after that ended, I was left thinking, did my sort of career peak at 30? Because the company was not a huge success, the first company, Hotlinks, but I had was the founder of my own venture-backed startup in the dot-com boom, and for all I knew, that would
That was it?
That might have been the peak of my career forever. And of course, I had no idea that a couple years later I'd invent Friendster. I had no
Right.
idea, but that was sort of a weird thing to think. At around 30, boy, is my career downhill for the rest of my life.
It's crazy
you never
to
know.
say that. I had that same experience because after Silicon Valley Reporter, I've been on Charlie Rose, I had been profiled in the New Yorker, I had 70 employees, $12 million a year in revenue. It all went away.
Yep.
And then I'm sitting there like, I got to do something with myself. And in the same time period, I started the blogging network and said, maybe I can make some blogs and
Right.
Gadget and Autoblog
Yeah.
by there. But I did have that profound sense that I guess that was as good as it gets.
Yeah, I was wondering if that was the case, and then of course instead I ended up inventing Friendster.
Right.
And I, of course, when I was working on it, I had no idea how.
Right. And when
how,
that happens, is it just like this incredible rush? Like, okay, I wasn't a one-trick pony. I'm a home run hitter. I can just keep swinging that bat. I'm going to make contact with the ball again.
Well, it was like many entrepreneurs go through a real roller coaster.
Yeah.
So I had no idea, like I said, when I was starting Friendster, that it would be anything. Then it took off, and I was shocked. And then it started growing so fast that me and the original small team were desperately trying to keep the site up. And
I remember that. That was a
and-
big
right.
part of the legacy was because nobody had viral growth, nobody had ever had to have a system that had tens of millions of people like this overnight.
Yeah, and as we started fixing some of the things, then unfortunately we ended up having leadership who were less technical than me, and then some of the technology got replaced with worse technology.
Ugh.
So then that really, created, I think, a big opening for my space.
Yeah.
And that was frustrating as a technologist to see
Bad
us going
decisions get made.
backwards,
Right.
backwards on the technology.
What was the bad decision? They went to Oracle or something, or they went to
Do you want me to nerd out
.NET?
here? You really
Yeah,
want to
nerd
know?
out. You tell me.
Well,
What was
so
the-
one was that all the software was rewritten from scratch from Java to PHP, which makes no sense from a technology or business perspective. And that's sort of one of the things you're really never supposed to do. Joel Spolsky and a lot of other people, Steve Blank, write about that's like one of the worst mistakes you can make.
Why is that?
Because everybody wants to sort of start fresh, but you lose all the institutional knowledge you've captured with the old technology, and the new technology never works as well as it's supposed to.
Yeah.
And then it ends up taking longer than it's supposed to be built, and then you end up going backwards in so many different ways. And there's blogs that have been written about this, that go
Just
into
powerful
great detail,
with the
but they're
platform you
right.
picked. Right.
Yeah, that was a mistake. And instead of, if you really want me to geek out here, instead of scaling out rather than up and sort of adopting the model that was already becoming the new way of doing things from Google, where you chopped up your data into shards and put it on commoditized hardware.
Right.
The VP engineering that our investors recommended and his team, they ended up putting us on a Hitachi San, which cost millions of dollars. And then
Single point of failure.
And then other mistakes were sort of, instead of fixed, they were made worse. So we had too much MySQL replication that was introducing slave lag, and then they daisy chained the MySQL replication, and there's just a lot of mistakes that instead of just being fixed, the startups move quickly. If you make a mistake and you fix it, great. But if you just keep adding to your mistakes.
Watching Zuckerberg photocopy the site, he just basically stole it wholesale. And he admits that, among the things he stole wholesale from people, including equity and other things. He was a great technologist and an executor, right?
Well, I think he had great technologists on his team.
Right.
And I think that the company ended up, instead of going through, they ended up going through a few different presidents and COOs, but instead of having, some Hollywood guy, CEO or whatever, there was more consistency, and they did a much better job executing technically than Friendster or MySpace. And they had PHP, which is not perfect, but instead of then jumping from that to something else, they basically just made PHP work for them. And they've done, they've got MySQL and a lot of the same boring standard technologies that other people use, but they've just incrementally improved and improved and improved and scaled.
Did Zuckerberg ever try to hire you? He must have looked at you and said, wow, this guy created it all. Did he ever try to make a run and say, be president or something? Or?
Well, at the time I met him, it was sort of the other way around because Facebook was still very small, and Scott Sassa, who was one of the CEOs, the many CEOs of Friendster, he had been a Hollywood guy from NBC. He wanted to try to buy Facebook. And I think if somebody had offered something substantial, there might have been interest, but he made a sort of uncompelling offer for some part of Friendster stock. So that was sort of the context when I met him, and that was probably 2004.
So you keep plowing ahead. You launch at some point Founders Den, where we are now. Explain what is
and welcome. Thank you for coming to Founders Den.
It's amazing. I just walked around the place. The first time being here. It's long overdue. But what a gorgeous facility you have over on 3rd Street here in the heart of San Francisco.
Yep.
And it's buzzing with startups.
Yep. And as we were just walking around from lunch, of course, we saw our buddy Naval.
Yeah, we saw our buddy Naval from AngelList.
And that's pretty common. We're right at 3rd and Townsend, so you really cannot walk around here without seeing people in the industry.
So you decided at some point I'm going to open a co-working space. When and why, and how did this all start?
I think I have to blame it on my partner Jason.
Yeah.
He and I both had small kids at home and were sort of in transition between different projects and wanted a place where we could really concentrate and get work done.
Yeah.
And we weren't interested in just going to one of the existing co-working spaces. So the idea was proposed, what if we sort of created a place where some of our friends could hang out and work together, which sounded fun. And then, of course, like most entrepreneurs, we lack the sort of part in our brain that should have told us, boy, that's going to be a lot of work. We're crazy for trying to do that. And so it ballooned from there. We ended up sort of envisioning this sort of curated co-working space and private club for entrepreneurship, and ended up putting a lot of work, but now it's up and running. It's been less than 2 years. A lot of great companies. We've got some great sponsors, great advisors, and companies come in for around 6 months.
And what's the deal? Would you say you're like IO Ventures or?
Well, IO also has an accelerator program, and we don't do anything like that. We're not providing funding, and there's no class, there's no accelerator program.
So the people aren't coming here to say I'm going to get Jonathan's advice on all this stuff.
Well, if there's a company that I'm advisor to, I might deliberately approve them to be at Founders Den so that when they want my advice, I don't have to go somewhere.
Right.
It's convenient for me. So it goes both ways. There are companies that the 4 of us have been an advisor or investor in, and then we will try to get them in here.
Who are the other 2 founders?
There's 4 of us. There's
Bogue,
Zach Bogue, Michael Levitt, and Jason Johnson, and myself. And sometimes it goes the other way around. Sometimes the four of us meet a company because they're at Founders Den, and we might become an advisor or an investor. But all of that happens on an ad hoc basis. It's all purely organic.
Right. So you're not trying to be like, oh, come to my accelerator, give me 6%, and then we'll go.
We don't have time because this is for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs.
Right.
Zach has a fund, Data Collective, and the other three of us are all running companies, running our own startups. And we're not interested in competing with Y Combinator and IO and AngelPad because those programs already exist and they're great. And we have a lot of YC companies at Founders Den. What we were trying to do was, fill a little bit of an unmet need for ourselves and some of our friends.
Right. So pretty brilliant. And then the sponsors, because I noticed that the fees that people are paying, somebody came up to me and told me what they were paying per month for a desk, $500 or something. It seems like that's a little bit less than what it would actually cost in San Francisco.
Well, our model is to charge pretty much an industry standard rent. There's probably a couple crappier places that maybe charge a little less, and a lot of places that charge more.
A lot more,
and we've deliberately tried to be sort of just average on the rent. Half the space isn't even rented out. It's used for events and parties and lunch and our advisors and sponsors to hang out. And we have subsidies from our sponsors and partners, and they are helping out.
Who are the sponsors?
So they're all listed on our website at foundersden.com. I want to make sure I don't forget anybody, but we've got Norwest Venture Partners. We've got Bullpen Capital. We've got Wells Fargo, DLA Piper, Hood and Strong, Second Market, Rackspace, and I hope I haven't forgotten somebody.
No, but anyway, that's a good list. So you basically got them to commit for a couple of years to put the space on, so they can host events here.
They host events,
have access to
they're part of the community, they use the space, and we also have some firms that are like members that also come and hang out at the Den as well.
And this is really the gestalt of Silicon Valley and why it's special, isn't it? That you create something like this, somebody like yourself and your partners create something like this without some onerous expectation or, that you're going to just predatory expectation on the startups. And you go to some other places, whether it's Japan or China or France, even in some other places where the rich people who create something like this are then like trying to, control or own a large percentage of the companies that would go hang out in them.
Our model is that it's very much boutique. It's not intended to be a real business, and it's for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. We do get emails every week from people in other countries, Asia. I guess they read TechCrunch or whatever, and they want to come and visit Founders Den and tour it and learn about what we do. And we don't even really have time to accommodate most of them, but it's bizarre.
And what are you going to say? Like, we let people work here.
Yeah, I mean,
thank you very much.
It's a pretty simple model. I mean, I think people think it's often more complicated than it is. It's really, sort of an invite-only, referral-only co-working space, and then sort of this, hangout sort of club for entrepreneurs and with our advisors and sponsors, and and people like Gavin Newsom, who rents a desk, and some of the other interesting folks that are on our advisory board or work at the partner companies.
Interesting. So tell me about your latest company.
Right, Nuzzle.
Nuzzle. We got there.
Yes. And I have to apologize because you're one of the two people I haven't sent a bait invitation to.
Right, I know. You explained it to me.
You and Robert Scoble.
Right.
So Nuzzle is...
We're called the whales.
Yes.
Not because of our size, but because of our follower and our following sizes.
Right. The problem is not the number of people that are following you. The problem for me, and maybe it's a problem, I don't know, I was a little worried to test it before I had an engineering team to make sure that if the site crashes, it's not just me, but it's the number of people you're following. Because you and Robert are two pretty unique people in following a lot of people.
Yeah, I follow probably 100,000 and have 150. He has something similar.
Something similar, which is very, very, very unusual.
Because he and I would never put on the suggested user list, so we never got the artificial spike. But when they started Twitter, in the early days of Twitter, if you didn't reciprocate a follow, people got very upset. Like, I followed you, what the F, And so I emailed Ev and Biz about it, and Robert, we were all in like an email chain. And they were like, we'll create something because I was like, I have to follow like 20 people a day, because 20 people a day are joining the service and following me. But it was only the tech community, and I was like, it's just too hard to follow.
You must have spent a lot of time manually following that many people.
They made a little tool that...
For you.
Twitter made a tool for Robert and I that auto-followed everybody.
Okay, now it explains it.
But then we turned it off, and they stopped doing that. But then I use now a product called Tweet Adder to just follow anybody who follows me.
And is that kosher?
I think it's allowed because I limit it to like 1,000 people a week or a couple hundred people a day or something. It just runs in the background on my desktop. And the only reason I do that is because it makes people feel good.
Right.
And I have a list of like my peeps. But the way you could get around it is just the first 10,000 people I ever followed would be my real hardcore people, the first 20,000.
So I follow around 1,000 people.
Right.
Interesting people that I've sort of carefully curated over the last few years. And most people follow less than that. Most people that I'm friends with probably have maybe they're following 200, 300 people, and Nuzzle still works for them. For me, it's really great at 1,000. But I was a little worried about what would happen during the beta. So Nuzzle is a social news service that lets you see the news stories that your friends are sharing on Facebook and Twitter, and it's really fast and simple and easy. But right now, it's just me. I'm very soon going to be hiring employee number 1 and 2 and 3. Until I do, I was a little worried. I just literally didn't know if
you'd be in a Friendster 2.0 situation.
Well, I didn't know whether or not I needed to add a few more servers or not. If it would just sort of explode if
so
I
you
plugged in your
coded this
account.
whole project yourself, set up the servers and everything yourself. So you can basically wake up one day and just say, I'm going to start a company.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
A little harder to do Founders Day because we had to go out and find the space, and then we had to figure out the furniture.
It's a
and
great
all
feeling,
these,
though,
all
to
these
be a
physical
coder
things.
and as famous as you are, and your ability to raise money and be a coder. I mean, if you look at Pincus or Ev Williams or any of the other entrepreneurs, Loic, who could just wake up one day and say, I'm starting a company and get a check from somebody, you can actually get the check and you could write the code.
Well, I think a lot of entrepreneurs are technical. I mean, I think
Yeah.
the Google guys and the Yahoo guys and, so many people I know, most of them do
I don't think the
code.
Google guys have written a line of code in
Well,
a
maybe
decade.
not. Maybe not recently. And the same
Yeah.
thing will be true of me. So that's even more reason why I enjoy building the prototype myself, because I know that very soon when my time is spent being on shows and talking to investors and then hiring and firing
That's going away.
and managing people and guiding a team, I'm not going to be able to spend my time actually writing the code.
Was
So it's
there
fun
even
for me
something
do
more to it this time? Did you feel like, to a certain extent, your success in Friendster came from coding, that this is how your success comes, is when you actually are the product?
There's something to that, yes. So all 4 companies. So I've done a nightclub in the co-working space and 4 internet companies, and I coded the prototype for all 4 of those myself and enjoyed doing it. But what was interesting was with Friendster, because it was 2002, we sort of followed a little bit of the lean ideas, not because we're smart, just because of necessity.
Right. Lean before lean, social before social.
Right. So I mean, nobody was going to fund Friendster in 2002.
Right.
So we just threw this thing up, and then it turned out, sort of an MVP, if you will, and then people liked it, and it grew from there. With Socializer, I actually raised money. I built a prototype first, so I didn't raise money off of PowerPoint. I built a prototype, but we didn't really sort of test it in the marketplace before raising money, and it turned out that the event space sucks, and it's really hard to grow a service that connects to physical real-life events, because somebody was not going to go and have a baby shower the next day just for an excuse to use Socializer.
Right.
So I think I realized that it is good, like at Friendster, to, before I decide that this is something that should have a whole team and investors, outside investors, really get some real feedback before that.
And the reason is you don't want to waste 2 or 3 years of your life on it and then have that obligation to the investors.
Yeah, and to yourself. And I guess some people think that you can just start with anything and then pivot and pivot and pivot and pivot and somehow you get to some miracle.
Yeah.
I don't really subscribe to that theory.
Yeah.
I love coding, and like I said, when the company gets big, I can't be doing that myself. So it's fun to start off that way. But I think that if I looked at Friendster and Social, I realized that, getting that MVP out there to real users and getting real feedback first before deciding if this is a project that should be a funded project is a good idea.
And so how is the project going so far? How does it actually work? What's the value proposition to users?
Yeah, I wish I could have shown it to you, and we'll have to fix that.
No problem.
Scoble has offered to give me his password and let me plug it in and see what happens. But I think what I'm going to do is very soon we're going to hire our first engineer 1, engineer 2, and we're going to have some other folks. So it's not just me if things crash.
I could have one of my people
and then we'll figure it out.
lend me their account.
Right.
Maybe Kieran Kalia from the launch ticker.
So it's very, very, very simple. You log in with your Twitter account. Currently it's still invite only, and then it just scans your Twitter. It also connects to Facebook, and it just shows you in a very simple interface news stories that your friends are talking about, linking to, sharing, tweeting, liking, retweeting. It's deliberately very simple.
And so I know every news story that my friends have talked about.
Right.
This exists in Flipboard in a way. So how is it different than Flipboard, or how will it be different?
Yeah, there's other stuff that's sort of similar. I mean, I think that Flipboard is really cool and does a lot of stuff that Nuzzle's not going to do, and vice versa. So that one's a little more different. But I get asked, how is this like this or different than that? And it's kind of funny because when I did Hot Links, it was social bookmarking in 1998, 1999.
Yeah, this is years before Delicious.
Way too early. Before Delicious, and I think even Delicious was probably too early. And
Clearly.
the concept was people sharing links with each other. Well, that's what people are doing on Twitter, and that's a lot of what Nuzzle's about.
Wow, you've come full circle.
The concept makes sense, but social bookmarking per se is maybe a little too nerdy, a little too literal. And you've seen it expressed now in Stumble Upon and Pinterest, and so the concept makes sense. But
It's just
98 was way
cool
too early.
Stuff.
Yeah, but 98 was way too early. And then with Friendster, it was a first mover. And with this idea, I had the idea a couple of years ago, but I was in the process of selling Socializer and then starting Founders Den and really busy and wasn't able to focus on it right away.
Yeah.
And then some other stuff came out, but I said, you know what? I've been too early. I've been a first mover.
Yeah.
None of those were necessarily a guarantee of success. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to worry about that.
Right. Worry about what then? What do you have to worry about if you're not first? If you're coming into a market where people have played a little bit.
There's two things that I sort of want to worry about in a startup thing. One is it a good market at all?
Right.
Social networking was a good market, and even excluding Facebook, there were over $1 billion of other companies in venture-backed exits.
Yeah.
Not too shabby.
Right.
Events is a bad market, and people still every week somebody emails me, and wants advice on some event sharing app.
Competitor.
Or some event sharing app on the iPhone, and I email them, the links to what happened with Socializer and Plancast and Going.com and 7 others, and say, read these, and they still don't usually.
Yeah.
But in
so
social
you really want to
bookmarking,
know if there's a market there, because
a big market, but also one that's easy to tap into, because it's not like events is not a big market, but it's just a crap market because it's got the real life sort of physical event latency.
Right.
It's not like, every year you have a birthday and people have retirement parties and baby showers and all sorts of stuff, but most of the sites that have tried to do stuff in events, I think, have realized that that's a difficult market. And there are other markets that are big, like music. For every Pandora and Spotify, there's a lot of other companies that
Hundreds.
have been burned through. So there's some markets that are you want to be a big market, but you also want a market that's just sort of going to be not impossible for a startup to somehow grow into quickly.
Yeah, some markets are prickly in a way.
Yeah.
Like they seem like they are too hard to get a handle on, hard to get into. Of course, if you do, then I guess it would be brilliant if you do get into them. But
Sure.
some markets,
and there's markets that involve legislation, and if you have specific core companies that you can somehow manage that might be an advantage. But I personally would not get into
it's interesting. Like I was just thinking about that. I was like, what would be a hard market? I was thinking real estate, but I'm like, wow, there's been so many great companies in real estate in the last couple of years. That one seems to be very much accepting the disruption in a way, or open to advancement and evolution. It's like almost like, are they open to evolution or not? How hard do they fight it? And are they strong enough to fight it to the death? Because the music industry seems to be strong enough to fight it to the death. You mentioned Spotify and Pandora being successful. If they're successful, correct me if I'm wrong, until the music industry decides that Pandora is no longer successful.
Different markets have different issues. With events, it's really, I think, just about sort of the latency that makes it hard to grow virally quickly. So that's one of the issues is are you in a market that's big and also not going to be impossible for a startup to somehow conquer and scale cost effectively. And then the other issue really is if it is a good market, can you be a breakout success in that market or not? And most companies don't. Part of the things I look at also is there somebody sort of already synonymous with the market? So trying to do a new search engine right now and sort of compete with Google.
Yeah, I've been there.
It's just really, really hard.
It sucks.
And actually trying to compete with Evite sucked, even though Evite's
a horrible product.
Even though it has
Garbage.
so many flaws, it's still synonymous with the category. So somebody might say, okay, I've got a baby shower, I'm going to put an event.
Yeah, they almost use it when they use it like a verb.
Right.
Then you're effed.
Right, because they might have used Evite for something 7 years ago, and they're just going to go to the computer and type in Evite. And even if Wired or Oprah Magazine says, use Socializer, it's better, they might not even think to even research it. They're just going to go and type in Evite, just habitually.
And you did get a ton of press for Socializing. People did love the product.
And probably 99% of the people who use Evite never read any of those articles.
Right.
So
and if they did, it goes in and out.
Competing with somebody who's synonymous with the market is tough. So in social news, I don't think there's somebody who's really there. Dig could have and maybe should have been the company that would have been, the ubiquitous brand name of social news. Unfortunately, like Friendster, they had their ups and downs. So those are the things I think about.
As well, in a way. Like they had this huge 4.0 debacle and couldn't technically get the new product out the door.
And when that 4.0 came out, I actually had already thought of the idea for Nuzzle. And when I heard the rumors, I thought, oh, I'm probably not going to end up doing this because it sounds like they're going to do this idea I have. I thought they were going to do something like that.
Yeah, it did seem like they were going
to.
to.
And they sort of did, but, the thing is people, there's always these debates in the blogs about like whether it's the idea that's important or not. But like my idea is not, social news. That's not the idea. My idea is like social news with a multitude of subtle details of how I'm going to do social news and why and how it's going to look and how it's going to work and what it's not going to do and what it's going to be called and, and all the important little subtle details.
And all those subtle details really make the difference. I mean, and you saw that. I mean, from Rise to Friendster to MySpace to Facebook and then to Instagram and now Path, they're all social networking, but they're all so different in terms of details.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of the latest? What do you think of Path?
I like
use
it.
Path?
I don't use it a ton because Path is supposed to be your smaller, your 100 real friends, perhaps because your friend graph on Facebook got really diluted. And so for me, the people who are my really closest friends and family members are not the strongest technology adopters in my life. Those people are a little less sophisticated.
The laggards, yeah.
But since I am an entrepreneur who lives in San Francisco, I have thousands and thousands of not as close friends who are all over Path and Instagram and all this kind of stuff. So when I go on a site like that, I have thousands of industry friends that are using it. So for me, it's still kind of like, unfortunately for me, Facebook and LinkedIn even are sort of the same because I live in this world. I'm not
your network is business,
right? And I live in San Francisco, and I'm friends with most entrepreneurs here.
Yeah.
So I'm not a normal user of social media, obviously.
Right. What do you think about Facebook? Now year whatever it is, getting close to 10, and people always say it's younger than it is. Like if you count it from when it started in his room, it's pretty close to 9 or 10, right? Is it 10?
I think it's almost 10 years.
Yeah. So what do you think of it at 10 years old?
Well, I think Facebook has done a phenomenal job overall.
Right.
But also overall, I'm kind of surprised how little things have changed since the sort of prototype of Friendster 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Because you could probably take one of the 2003 articles about Friendster and replace Friendster with MySpace, and it would have been an 06 article, or replace it with Facebook, and you might not notice a difference today. And obviously it's evolved and there's the platform and all this kind of stuff. But given that sort of 10 years, in the 10 years prior to Friendster, we had sort of Tim Berners-Lee like inventing the web.
Right.
What was that, around 91 or something?
Yeah.
And then I remember, of course, downloading the first beta of Mosaic,
Yep.
Mark Andreessen at University of Illinois, and
Then
then
Netscape,
downloading
yeah.
the first beta of Netscape.
Yeah, I remember too.
And then Netscape and Yahoo going public, and then I decided, hey, I'm moving to Silicon Valley, and I emailed my resume to Netscape and Yahoo, and I never heard back from Yahoo, but Netscape hired me, and then we had the dot-com boom, and then we had the dot-com crash, and all of that happened in in a 10-year period. So we basically went from from the web starting to all that. And then
social network seems to be like this execution play then, right?
I don't know, but in 2002, that's when I came up with, with the concepts of Friendster. It's now 10 years later, and it doesn't seem to have, evolved 10 years worth. I mean, obviously
it seems to be the same experience to me. You go and I write an update, and then people comment on it.
Yeah,
it's the graffiti wall.
It just doesn't seem as much has happened in the last 10 years as happened in the 10 years from 92 to 2002.
The criticism of Zuckerberg and the criticism of Facebook is they're really not innovators. They're executors, sure, but what did they do that was so innovative in the space that wasn't already done before?
Well, that's kind of like Microsoft, and most of the most successful companies in technology are the ones that execute the best.
Right, but it didn't seem like there was some originality in some of those cases. So there doesn't seem to be any originality.
Not in Microsoft, for example.
Yeah, very little in Microsoft, I guess.
I mean, a lot of the, Silicon Valley is full of companies, like Netscape, and, that were innovative and pioneers and didn't
It's almost
succeed.
a liability, isn't it?
Yeah, and when I was working at Netscape, I later looked back and realized the whole company was full of all the people who had worked at all the other cool companies like SGI and Next, Intelligent and Kaleida and General Magic and Xerox PARC.
General Magic,
yeah,
wow, you're going old school.
We had, right, but there were people at Netscape from all those hot companies.
Yeah. Red flag?
And in retrospect, we all got our asses kicked by Microsoft.
Right.
Basically copying stuff and making somewhat mediocre technology, but still
they made it the default.
winning. Yeah.
And Facebook has become the default. I'm just surprised they don't seem to have many original ideas. You know, like they do Q&A long after Yahoo and Quora. They do the gift thing long after other people have done gifting, you know, Amazon gifting, other people doing gifting.
Well, it is a big company now.
Yeah, but you would think they would have some unique feature that didn't exist before they started.
Do they do like the 20% time that Google does? Do they
Definitely
do that?
not. Definitely not.
They
But he
do
did
a lot
say
of
they're going
hackathons,
to.
right?
Yeah, they do hackathons, but I think the hackathons have been like, let's get all of the Android, you know, versions, you know, the last 15% of Android done. And so when I talked to an insider very high up at Facebook, they said, Jason, the reason we don't innovate is because getting that Android version or this browser compatibility or this country online or
At
this
their
language
scale
at their scale
is hard.
has a bigger impact, though,
Yeah.
than the new feature will. So getting
And they've done a great job.
Yeah.
Scaling is hard, and they have incrementally, you know, executed on their engineering better than anybody. And they've done a really good job. So, you know, maybe they don't want to, you know, break what's working. But maybe it would be cool if sort of like Gmail Labs, maybe if there was some weird tab on Facebook, you know,
Experimental.
where Facebook engineers could build weird crap, and you'd have to go to this weird place to see.
Yeah.
You know, that might be fun to see what kind of random weird stuff.
Yeah,
But it was, you know, be some special tab you'd have to go into. That'd be fun to see what was in there.
Yeah, some randomness would be awesome.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously what they've done has worked very well.
What do you think the key to success as an entrepreneur, now that you're in decade 2 of it, you've gotten your ass kicked, you've had the highest highs, the lowest lows. When you break it down to its essence, what do you think makes a great entrepreneur?
Well, I think one of the big problems is that every story is different. And there are so many blog posts these days that want to say, these are the 5 secret tips to entrepreneur success. And you can't actually copy somebody else's story. I mean, if you look at the history of Facebook, I don't think somebody else, you know, people are inspired by it, it seems, young people, but you can't really go and copy that path, you know, of how Facebook came to be. There was a lot of interesting twists and turns. And it's not something I think somebody can really emulate. Right. And that's what everybody wants to do now. They want to distill it into a formula. Right. So there's that, you know, that like, oh, you need a designer, a hacker, and a hustler. You need 2.3 founders. Everybody's trying to come up with some magic formula, and that's not how it works. There's a lot of luck and randomness to it. And we've had great entrepreneurs who are on the advisory board at Founders Den come here and give talks. And sometimes it's amazing how much luck, almost failure, and randomness, you know, occurred. Phil Libin from Evernote told the story about how they almost went out of business. The economic crisis happened, Sequoia, rest in peace, deck came out, the funding that they were just about to happen fell apart, and they were days away from closing down the company. And then somebody from like Sweden or something who was like an angel investor,
a super fan,
and a big user, and gave them some money,
$500,000.
Dennis Crowley gave a talk here, and you know, talked about how many of the features, you know, of Foursquare, and this happened at Twitter too, but you know, the mayors and some of the things were things that sort of organically, unexpectedly happened, and all this kind of stuff. So part of, I think, what people need to realize is that you can read all the books and blogs you want, but you can't just copy some other startup's path or some other entrepreneur's path. And I think people are sort of trying to decipher the magic formula these days.
And it's sort of like making a great movie or a rock and roll band. It may not be that formulaic, and it changes over time, doesn't it? Like,
and you have to play to your personal strengths. So you know,
sure.
I have a software engineering background. Different entrepreneurs have different strengths. Different companies, you know, are in different areas, and you know, timing and market and what's going on out there. I mean, a lot of these things play a factor. So you know, a lot of the advice is generic advice that just doesn't really work for everybody. So you could say all the, you know, the trite things about you know, the lean startup approach and being resilient and, you know, and all that kind of stuff, but you know, anybody who's going to do it probably instinctively knows that stuff.
Right. Do you think it's too easy to be an entrepreneur today? There's so many
Maybe it's too easy to pretend to be an entrepreneur.
Okay,
I mean, you
unpack
know,
that.
Like a 19-year-old, you know, writes a blog and then TechCrunch says, oh, one of the youngest entrepreneurs, whatever. Like, you know.
People throw the title around?
Yeah, and I you know, and people, you know, there are people who lie these days about founding companies they didn't found. That seems to be really popular these days. I don't know why.
Why would somebody do that?
It's very common lately.
Really?
Sure.
Who lies
all the
about
time? I'm sure you can think of examples. I'm not gonna.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna suggest some, but I know you can think of some. Yeah, I mean, look, this is not, everybody wants to say it's a bubble. They've been saying that for at least 3 or 4 years.
Right.
This is not like 1999, but certainly
Why is it not? Why is it not?
Well, there's not a million companies that went public that are complete crap that are probably going to lose 99% of their value.
Right.
That level of stuff is not going on.
Right. In fact, the companies that have gone public seem to be very much undervalued in a lot of situations. They're trading, in Zynga's case, below book value.
Well, there are at least 2 companies I can think of that have gone public that really maybe did not have sustainable businesses, but that's 2, not 200.
Right.
And there are, issues with those. But
oh, can you say?
I think you can guess it.
Well, Zynga, do you think Zynga's just not sustainable, or do you think it is? I mean, $1 billion in revenue. I mean, the games are obviously fleeting in a way. But
I mean, I'm not going to speak to that
gaming
company
isn't.
in particular, but
Yeah.
I think that, I value, like we were talking about innovation,
Right.
companies that copy all their stuff from other people and then hypocritically sue people for copying them and scam the users and
Yeah.
mistreat their employees. I mean, that to me is not representative of the, what has made Silicon Valley historically great. But what is similar now to 1999 is sort of the fetishizing of startups. I mean, everybody wants to be a founder right now.
Right.
And obviously in 2002, that stopped.
Right.
And now, of course, everybody wants to do that again. And that gets to be a little excessive, and it'll probably self-correct at some point.
I did hear that Y Combinator, I guess they hit high 80s in terms of the last class, now coming down to the 60s.
Well, I think part of it was just the feedback at Demo Day, and I was there, is that people can't even remember all the companies after sitting through 80 demos. And there's not really any graceful way to solve that, because it's not like people really want, there's B2B day versus a B2C day or anything like that. So, I think the much bigger than any growth of YC has been the growth of all the YC clones.
Right.
Because YC going from 40 to 80 is not really nearly as much of a delta as like 200 YC like clones popping up in every city across the planet.
And is that a bad thing or a good thing? I mean, they're clearly not going to have the density and success that you see here in the Valley for obvious reasons. But, comparing it to a college education, which costs whatever it is, $100,000, $200,000, I mean,
Yeah.
going to a founder collective in another second-tier city.
That is a good point, because
Yeah.
if you come out of it and your thing failed, you're not, you don't have $100,000 in student loans. Worst
And you
case
burn
scenario-
somebody else's money.
Yeah, worst case scenario, you have some interesting stuff to put on your resume, and Twitter or Google will probably be excited to hire you based on
Yeah,
that. Probably.
you tried and failed. Join us.
So, yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. I don't know if it's a good or bad thing. Obviously, in San Francisco right now, there's so many seed-backed startups, and there's so many, it's so difficult to hire people, because all the engineers that that are sort of startup types all want to run their own company right now.
Yeah.
And that sort of dilutes the talent pool for everybody, and that's tough. But that's the kind of thing that's got to self-correct itself, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these companies are going to get to the point where they make either no revenue, and ultimately the business is going to be decided based on how much top line and bottom line revenue it has. Ultimately, that's what the public market does, right?
Yeah, but I mean, it can go very long when you're being, scrappy and lean. I mean,
Sure.
we saw some of these weird, sort of aberrant examples lately of 2 companies that raised, huge amounts of money pre-launch.
Color.com.
Yeah, and another one.
What was the other one that raised a ton of money pre-launch?
There's a couple recently, but that's statistically not.
edX. Is edX raised 100? That's the private, like Coursera.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah, make
but,
a note. I want to have the edX
But
CEO.
most of the companies working at Founders Den are so lean and efficient, and even if
50,000 in burn a month, 100,000 in burn a month.
even if they don't get immediate traction, or they struggle to get their Series A, or things go into a downturn or whatever, like if they're really working on something that is promising, they can hunker down with so little and keep going. And that's in sharp contrast to 1999 era companies that had huge data centers and were paying $10 million alone to Sun and Oracle and license fees, and then were Super Bowl commercials and all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
and the big $1 million parties in Vegas. I mean, it's a totally different world.
Yeah.
Where do you think the Valley will be in 10 years? Is it going to be, bigger and better? Is it going to be, some people, I guess David Sachs was saying, this is going to be like, there's going to be a big 4 and that's it, and
Yeah.
it's entrepreneurship's over, perhaps.
Well, I definitely don't think that's true.
Convenient timing for David.
For
sell
David, yeah.
Sell your company for $1 billion.
Right.
Entrepreneurship is now over. He's like, I'm done. It's over.
And which are the big 4, the big 5, or whatever, that seems to change at
Yeah.
least every decade.
Right.
So,
So you don't buy this like, oh, there's no hope of ever building another
hell no.
Google or Yahoo
No,
or
absolutely,
Amazon.
absolutely not. No, I mean, all the companies that are, the great companies today will someday will be the Microsoft and IBMs themselves in a later date.
All right,
it's
I
sort of
say-
inevitable.
Yes, they will slow down and lose their innovation. And in Facebook's case, they really haven't been innovative.
And they're,
who knows if they can inject
and their
innovation
best
into their...
engineers will eventually leave to start their own companies.
And they have, in droves. It's
And
supposed
they
to be
will
getting
keep-
easier and easier
and
to
they'll
take
just keep
Facebook
doing
engineers.
it. That's not going to stop.
That's the cycle.
Yeah.
That's the cycle. Okay, I say a company, you tell me what you think.
Oh.
Here we go. This is the first time I've ever done on the show. I don't have a list. I'm just going to do it, pretend I have a list.
No.
Airbnb.
I don't even know much about it. I mean, all my friends use it. I'm too old, I think.
Uh,
I have friends who work there. Everybody loves the company. I mean, and I hear they're going to raise some huge new round.
Square.
Um,
What do you think of the idea? What do you think of the...
I don't, again, I don't know. It's not my expertise. I mean,
It's not,
I've got one of their little things. I
Yes.
haven't actually, used it. People certainly love the company.
Marissa Yahoo.
Um,
She gonna make the comeback?
I think she
Impossible task?
desperately needs more advice from idiots on blogs who've never run a company.
Yeah, that would be helpful, wouldn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
No, seriously. I mean, she's going to go in a tech direction. It seems it's come out. Today was the 10Q, the earnings. She's going to go tech,
I know
not
very
media.
little about running huge companies. It seemed to be a hire that really excited a lot of people, and I think Yahoo needed that.
Yeah. Listen, this has been amazing, except for the end where I randomly told you companies that you're...
Mahalo.
Mahalo.
Yeah.
Soon to be inside.com. Oh, I'm supposed to say?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a good
Can
one.
I put you on the spot?
Sure, you can. Best product and best team in the history of the company. And ultimately will be a large success. That's what I believe, at least. You have to be a little bit delusional, don't you?
You do. Otherwise, it would just be way too much work.
Right. Sort of like you said with Founders Den, like if I actually knew
Oh, yeah.
all the work this took to build this place, you'd be like, why would I do that?
Yeah, I think a normal person just would be dissuaded. And I mean, how many times have you had somebody who walk up to you and say, I had an idea for doing something like one of the things you've done?
Oh, God.
Right.
If I had a nickel. I had people copy my bad ideas.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
I did human-powered search, and these Germans copied it down to the pixel level, and then this guy with organized health in New York copied it and stole the HTML.
There were Friendster clones that still said on the About Us page that it was started by Jonathan Abrams back, in
That's
the
the thing
day.
about these thieves. That like this guy is from Organized Wisdom stole my actual HTML code that said in it the HTML code, and then we had a device which was like the Mahalo top 7. It was like these are the top 7 links, and they crossed out Mahalo and put Organized Wisdom top 7, and the 7 were the same in order, but the HTML underneath it still had the Mahalo top 7 because we had tagged it.
I usually put in my HTML, like as an Easter egg to any technical people looking at it,
Yeah.
hey, if you're reading this, email me your resume.
Yeah.
So I'd be curious to see if they would,
Yeah.
email the original company.
Then I called the guy up, the scumbag guy from Organized Wisdom. I called him up, and I had known him in New York. And I was like, we knew each other in New York. We had dinner. Like, you were at some of my parties. Like, why would you steal our stuff? He said, oh, we didn't steal it. We were inspired by you. And I was like, well, here's the content. Here's the code. And here, and here's the design.
I'm used to it.
I guess you got to I don't care anymore because now I have a platform that I can call anybody out on it. So to the Organized Wisdom people, you failed. You're scumbags. Kill yourself. I'm not supposed to say kill yourself anymore on the show, but I just can't.
Probably
help myself.
not.
It's the Brooklyn in me comes out sometimes. I hate stealing.
Can I ask if there's anybody who works for Coca-Cola to send me some free soda at Founders Den?
Absolutely, they should. Absolutely. Yeah. Listen, continued success. You've been very honest on the program, been a great guest, and I really look forward to seeing Nuzzle when it's ready. Is it going to be what's the domain? What's the Twitter handle so we can follow?
It's Nuzzel.
Yeah. .com.
.com.
You got the .com for Nuzzle?
Like you, I only like .coms. And,
Yeah. Why is that?
I actually
school?
have sent your post on naming and branding to a lot of people.
Yeah.
I like naming things too. I came up with Founders Den and Friendster and Nuzzle, and I don't really like non.com domains for consumer internet companies.
It just screams.
Because
I
if you don't have
get
it, somebody else is gonna get it
Right.
and put up something there.
How do you like the
Company takes
domain
off.
name inside.com?
Inside.com. I like anything.com if it's short.
Inside, S-I-D-E, inside.
I also like things that are a little weird and goofy, like Twitter and Google are sort of words, but they're sort of not.
Yeah,
So when somebody's
like
talking
Mahalo
about
is that,
Twitter
yeah.
and Google, you know they're probably talking about. And when somebody's talking about Nuzzle, you hear somebody talking at at the coffee shop down the street about Nuzzle.
Yeah.
They're probably going to be talking about me. Whereas somebody's talking about color. I mean, that's such a generic word. It could be
Yeah.
anything. So I like simple,
A little
short,
playful.
and playful.coms.
Yeah, playful.coms are good too. All right, listen, this has been incredible. Everybody follow Nuzzle.com or check it out. Follow at Nuzzle.
And we'll get you on soon.
And you'll get me on soon. That's fine. You know what I'll do is I'll have Kieran Callia set it up, and then we'll go from there. Hey, thanks to our sponsors. Brandis, good job getting up here through the bad weather in San Francisco. Jason DeMont, thanks for running the company so well. We will see you all next time on This Week in Startups.